What's going on, guys? So we are back on the Jeeps again, and I know you guys love them, so I don't know why, but I know you guys absolutely love these darn Jeeps, and I'm okay with that because you guys love them enough to keep watching these videos. But we're back on the Jeep that we are just about finished up with, and one of the things that we're going to do today with it is we're actually going to be installing the 2.5-inch lift kit on it. And we have our rough country shocks along with our 2.5-inch rough country springs. And I'm kind of going to take you a little step by step on, you know, what the easiest way to do this is. And I don't know if I've actually mentioned this in a video before, but we have a little trick that we use to get the springs in and out of these things, because they can be kind of a pain in the butt, and loosening up control arms when you don't need to replace them is a pain in the butt, and all that other stuff. And I apologize if I'm screaming, because I'm still used to having to scream with the old GoPro and the old audio, but we should be good. So let's just take a quick overview of what we've actually done to this Jeep so far. I'll get you guys some more light here. There we go. So we did coat the entire frame, and you guys can see pretty well that the whole frame is coated. Everything's been painted. We did put this really amazing tire carrier bumper on this thing. We did do the entire frame like we always do. We do need to shoot a little bit more paint on it, but we still have yet to put the side steps back on, so we're going to do that. And then we went ahead and fixed the center torque boxes, the center body mounts, all that stuff was repaired. So that's good. And then of course our front sections here. So what we're gonna do now is we gotta get the welder out of the way, and we are going to get God, that's so bright, new light. We're going to go ahead and get all of the stuff out of the way, get this Jeep dropped down. We spent all day yesterday cleaning up the shop. I mean, you guys can kind of see it looks a little bit better than it did. We got rid of all the cardboard, but we still got rust everywhere that we got to sweep up. So let's get all of this stuff out of the way, and then I'll take you guys back and I'll show you exactly how we're going to start doing this stuff and getting all this stuff apart. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to pull the sway bar links, and those are easy. They're just two 18mm bolts that are right there. We'll just get these. Watch your ears. All right, there's one, and then the other one on the other side can be a little bit difficult to get because the exhaust is kind of in the way. So I usually just see if we can get up over top of it. There we go. So now the sway bar is off of it, and we can pull this down, and that's just going to give us the ability to kind of move this axle around a little bit. So we can swing that down, pull the bolts out, and then the next step is going to be getting the rear shocks out, and that is where the fun comes into play, because up in here there are two 13mm bolts that don't ever like to come out. They usually rot in place, but we're lucky enough that this doesn't have factory shocks on it anymore, which means that somebody's already gotten up in there and pulled those out, and hopefully put some anti-seize on them so that we don't have to fight with them. So we're going to get a 13mm, and we're going to yank the shocks out. Once we yank the shocks out up there, we can get a 15 and an 18 over here, pull these out, and once we get these bolts out, we can get the shocks out completely. And guys, you'll have to forgive me right now, especially on the framing, because this new GoPro has so many screens and everything else, and you guys can't see it, but there's a big light on top, a big lume cube on top that's helping to not make me look like I'm in the dark all the time. But the framing is going to be a little bit odd, so just bear with me. We're going to go get those shocks off, and then I'll bring you back and show you the rest. Okay, so after we get the shocks out, which we got lucky, I want to show you guys a little bit of a trick here. So you'll notice I left one bolt in, and that is the bolt that is closest to the frame. leaving that bolt in there is going to save you a lot of hassle, because it's very difficult to get your fingers up in there when you want to put that back in with the shock in the way. So basically you end up taking the shock and sliding it up in there, sliding the tab over, and then putting the other bolt in and tightening everything down. Makes life a whole lot easier. Now the next thing we did after that was we went ahead and loosened up the lower control arm bolts as well as the upper control arm bolts, and that will allow us to basically drop the axle down enough to where the springs will then literally just come right out. Once you free them, there, spring comes right out. So it'll also make putting our new springs in a whole lot easier. And while these springs are out, what we're gonna go ahead and do is just kind of treat this with a little bit of rust preventative paint, just to make sure that they don't rust any further. And then we'll pop the new springs in, we'll pop the new shocks in, and that'll be it for the back end. So the driver's side is always a little bit more difficult, so I'm going to show you guys a little trick to get these springs in and out of here. So let me go set that up and I'll bring you guys right back. Okay, so here's the secret weapon. Get yourself a bottle jack. Doesn't have to be a 20-ton bottle jack, it could be a 1-ton bottle jack. Doesn't really need to be much at all. But what you're going to want to try to do is push the axle down. So we use the bottle jack and we kind of prop it on something there, and then we'll literally just going to start cranking down on this, and the more we do it, the more it pushes the axle down. And as it's pushing the axle down, the spring comes out with it. And it will also make room for our new spring. So that's the secret. Get a bottle jack in there. Once we get that spring, let's grab this guy here. There we go. Now that spring is out. And that spring is out completely. Now we can install the new spring, which might as well do this all in one clip. Why not, right? We got our old spring and we got our new springs over here, our 2.5 inchers. So we'll go ahead and throw this on up in here. And now what we're going to run into is the typical where we can't get the spring in because it's just a little bit too big. So we're going to keep jacking on this to get that rear end to come down a little bit more. We're going to try not to knock the Jeep off the lift because it's shaking pretty good. And we should be able to get this down far enough to where the spring can push right in. So we're going to keep doing that until we get to a point where we can get the spring in. Makes life a whole lot easier. Now you can just take a pry bar, pop that right in there, and you'll be good to go. And then the passenger side is way easier. Passenger side, because the track bar is not connected over there, has much easier movement, more travel. So you'll be able to get the spring in without using this method on that side. But we're going to end up using that same method on the front as well, and I'll show you guys that too when we get there. Okay, so now the rear is completely done. The springs are in, the shocks are in, we got all that stuff bolted back down. We went ahead and reinstalled our sway bar links. Those are good to go. You guys can kind of see on the inside of the frame here how nice they come out when they're done. Now, the only last thing we have left in the back is to tighten all the control arm bolts, but we're not going to do that until we get it on the ground, because you never want to tighten your control arm bolts while it's in its drooped position like this. First thing it does is put unnecessary tension on the actual control arm bushings, which can tear them and do all kinds of stuff, and it will actually hold the vehicle up about another inch. So you'll get a weird rake to it that will be because your bushings and your control arms are all sorts of under stress and everything else. So everything is good. As soon as we get it down on the ground, we'll tighten up all the control arms, and the rear lift kit will be complete. And now we're going to move on to the front, which is going to go very similar to the rear. We have to remove sway bar links. We got to remove the spring. We have to remove the shock. And these shocks are a little bit easier because you have two 12mm bolts here, and then the one bolt on top of the shock way up here. Yeah, this is what's nice. I don't have to scream at you guys and the camera's nowhere near me. But so we'll get the shocks out, get the springs out, we'll get the sway bar links disconnected, and then we'll use the same trick with our bottle jack to get the new front springs in, because you can see the front springs sitting right there are super long as compared to these little tiny guys that are in the Jeep in its stock form. So let's go ahead and get this front knocked out. All right guys, so here we are in the front, and it's basically exactly the same as what we did in the rear. We disconnected the sway bar links, we pulled the shocks out, which luckily came out pretty easy because they'd already been replaced. So the next thing is to literally just crank the jack down so that we can push everything down. And once we get it pushed down far enough, we'll be able to take the factory spring pretty much right out. So we got to go a little bit more. There you go. Now you can see it hanging. All right, so I got to get a tripod for you guys because this is tough holding and doing. But there we go. So that spring's out and good to go. And now we can keep cranking this thing down till we get enough room in there to actually get the giant spring. Let me show you the size difference here. All right, so quite a bit of difference, and with the factory ones being completely worn out and these being brand new, they don't compress as easily. So we got to make a decent amount of room in there to get that spring in, but we'll get it in. Okay, both springs are in and our trick worked again. So you do have to be careful doing this though, because you can accidentally stretch and break the brake line, so you have to be very conscious of how tight those are while you're pushing that axle down. And then you know, when you let everything back up, just make sure that you're not pinching anything or breaking anything, or, you know, whatever it may be. But springs are in there now. They look a little funny because the suspension's at full droop, but we will in a second put the shocks in. Once we get the shocks in, we can reconnect the sway bar, which we'll do again when the vehicle's on the ground, and everything will be done with the lift kit. And then literally we have to do the brakes on it, and that's it. So almost done with the lift kit. Okay, so I don't know what happened to that file, but the GoPro just went crazy. Figures, right? Brand new GoPro goes nuts. But we got the shocks in, we got the springs in, front and rear. Now you can expect, if you're doing this job in your driveway on the ground with minimal tools, give yourself the full day to do it, because you're gonna wrestle with the sway bar links, you're gonna wrestle with the control arm bolts, you're gonna wrestle getting the springs in and out. If you've got a bottle jack, use that little trick and it works beautifully. But you do want to give yourself a bit of time, you know, especially if you find that, you know, your upper spring buckets are completely gone and you need to replace those, or, you know, these bolts up here for the shock get stuck a lot, but there is access. If you push this panel away, right up in through there, there is access that you can get in there with a torch head and get those hot enough to actually take those bolts out. So you're going to be wrestling with some bolts, especially if you live in the Northeast. So give yourself some extra time to deal with this lift kit. But all in all, I can do them in about an hour, but I do them on almost every single Jeep that I've put together. So we'll explain that in a minute as to why I do this. And yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. I got to get a tripod so that I can put you all on the tripod and you'll be able to kind of watch me work, because right now we're just kind of dealing with the tiny little handheld tripod, and I could set it across the room, but then you can't see anything. So we'll get a tripod at some point soon so we can kind of, you know, get you guys in on the action here. But All right, so let me explain to you guys why it is that we use these rough country 2.5-inch kits on everything. There's one main reason for it. Number one, well, two main reasons really, or a whole bunch of them, however you want to take it. But the way that I look at it is with a 2.5-inch lift kit, you don't need extended sway bar links. You don't need extended control arms. You do not need to alter the brake lines. You don't need extended brake lines. You don't need to extend the track bars or put aftermarket track bars on it. And you don't have to do a slip yoke eliminator to adjust drive shaft angle. Nor do you even have to drop the transfer case to accommodate it. So all around it's just an easy kit to do, and it's very inexpensive. You know, these kits don't cost a lot of money. It'll give you 2.5 inches of lift. It'll make it so that you can easily clear 32 1150s, or you can clear 33 1250s as long as you're not doing any kind of crazy wheeling or anything, because they will rub. But a 31 1050 or a 32 1150 on this 2.5-inch lift makes these Jeeps look amazing. They're absolutely perfect for what we do. They're inexpensive. The shocks, the new N3 shocks, are pretty decent. So that's kind of why we do all of what we do on these things. And it just makes everything so much easier because you can slap the lift kit in, get 2.5 inches of lift, and it's a good spring lift. It's not the pucks, it's not garbage, it's not spacers. It's just an excellent all-around lift. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one, which will probably be the rear drum brakes, because you don't see that very often anymore. And yeah, have a good night.